Okay, so around that same period that I talked about in chapter 30, fairly soon after what I experienced at the restaurant, um, I didn't have a smartphone at that time, and but events would come up via social media and also walking around and reading street press and so forth that I just feel compelled to go to, that I would be drawn to, based on, I guess, that intuitive guidance that I've mentioned and that became more significant later on. And I went to a book launch just across the road. That's not really much help, but I'm in a suburb called Brunswick, and the author was giving a reading. And I turned up there, and the book she was talking about tackled so much of it, resonated so strongly with what I'd been experiencing. She spoke of Hermes, ancient cultures, the division between kind of like, I guess, magic and science that the Catholic Church embedded a wedge into. And she mentioned how the two would eventually come back together at some point, but that's kind of an overview from recollection. There's definitely details I've missed. And after the really strong resonance of that reading, I walked across the road and came to the supermarket and was just drawn here for some reason. And again, with that intuitive stuff, and turned around after getting here, and as you might be able to see it over there, just this massive owl. This is around time, I've spoken about, when symbolism was really significant, but I didn't expect to turn that corner and see the massive owl, given how I was feeling overall, but definitely after the really strong resonance of that book reading that I had no expectation of, because I didn't know what the book was about and I didn't know of the author. I just felt compelled to attend. And that continues post-September. And the other thing about this particular route is that there were then other birds across the way. And what I also realised after sort of tripping out at all that bird symbolism, like really large, is that I'd left my shitty little phone at the launch, and so I quickly went back across the road, went upstairs, and thankfully my phone was still there, but the author was standing exactly where I'd left the phone. It was really unusual. Like, in that packed room, she just happened to be standing right next to it. I then emailed that author later, actually, and she kindly replied and just kind of shared an understanding of things like synchronicity and so forth. But then what also happened after I went downstairs, because the bookshop is two-story, books downstairs, the reading upstairs, is that I went downstairs and discovered a book that was all about symbolism, and no, actually animal symbolism specifically. So after the birds and after all I'd been experiencing, I ended up just staying, after I retrieved my phone, in that bottom area and just reading through all this symbolism and the meanings and the various, the history and things like that. And that kind of, so given how soon it happened after the September thing at the restaurant, like what the author discussed and then the details I got from that animal symbolism book, it really kind of laid a foundation for then what would happen from then on. It was very timely. Okay, so as I've said, in the period subsequent to that experience at the restaurant, I always felt nervous and unsure of myself about returning there because of the magnitude of what occurred and what I experienced. And I would always return on a Friday. That became the pattern, as I said. And one Friday afternoon, I was sitting at a outdoor table just up there, having eaten some food, and was wondering whether I should go to the restaurant later. And literally, like, I think 5 minutes later, one of the staff members of that restaurant, or that company, should I say, because the company has two places and he works at the other place, literally turned, have a great day, literally turned that corner to walk towards me as I'm sitting at that outside table, and walked into that corner place there, because I think he's a musician and they were walking in there to suss some things out. And I was so taken by it that I went in there afterward and asked him if he actually worked at that place, and he confirmed it. So I don't know if he still works there, but if you see him, he'll remember that afternoon. But then that continually happened every Friday from then on for the period of time leading up to the launch of the brand. There would be signs that would occur, like in the time frame just prior to going to eat there. Okay, so in the immediate period following the transformational experience at the restaurant that I've talked about, so that experience that I've just discussed in an area called Brunswick, actually, involving the book launch and the street art, so a lot of the stuff that I'll talk about post. I've now realised the date is September 14 when that occurred in the restaurant, and so the events that I'll talk about post September 14 all happened kind of intermingled, or I won't be able to discuss them like in a linear fashion. I mean, that wouldn't work, but also the way I remember it, given that I didn't write it down at the time, is it just works best that way. And also in terms of grouping stuff together. So as I've mentioned in a previous chapter, I would get into these states of heightened anxiety, like in the hour or so leading up to going back to that restaurant to eat, and it would always happen on a Friday night, and that was after initially going there kind of at different times, but Friday night became the pattern, and that was the night when the experience occurred as well. And so one thing that I came to do is I would come to this park here, which is just around the corner from the restaurant, and I would just settle myself beforehand. The nature of the experience meant that it became really daunting for me to go back there. I didn't know exactly what had happened, and I didn't know what to expect, and because it involved another person, or other people, but one person in particular, and it was a male-female dynamic, and the female is younger than me. I was very cautious and apprehensive about what I was doing, but in terms of the way I was feeling, what I'd experienced, and what I continued to experience in my daily life, it became important to return there. And there would be signs throughout the day, like numbers and symbols, and there's stuff now that I'm actually having trouble recalling at the moment. But in the immediate period, like on the day of that I would plan to go back there, like so Friday day, like there'd be synchronicities or numbers would appear that would then make me feel like it was important to follow through with the plan to return there on the Friday evening. And so sitting at this park, Even after those signs, though, I would still be apprehensive, and so I'd come to this park and just relax before considering going into the restaurant. And then signs would appear here, feathers occasionally, mostly numbers, like, but that was kind of in the immediate period, like walking to here. Synchronicities occurred on occasion. Cats would sometimes appear in this park. One like darted from across the road there through the park like so quickly, at like with such perfect timing, because I had just been thinking about whether I would follow through, and then the cat came darting through, and then I went to the restaurant. Of particular note is on one occasion this was I think maybe the second or third ever time that I was returning there. I was sitting here, and while wondering what to do, looked up, and the park was completely empty and there was no one around, but a guy turned the corner there and came into the park. It was just like perfect timing. And he sat down at a bench behind me, adjacent to the bench I was sitting on, and I just got up and have a great day, sir. Thank you. And I just got up and walked onward to the restaurant, and just decided that that's what I was going to do. But there was something about this guy, just his demeanour and the vibe I got from him, that caused me to turn around at the perimeter of the park, walk back, and I think the first question I asked him, just like with the guy that was working and standing on the street, when I asked him about witchcraft, with this guy, I'm fairly certain the first question I asked was, do you know what synchronicities are? Amazingly, he knew exactly what I was talking about, and he gave one example of walking along thinking about something and then looking up, and a bus advertisement with a resonant response like flashing past at that exact moment. And so then we proceeded to talk further, and there was common ground that we shared, and also in terms of what I was thinking about. Like at that point, the idea of starting like some kind of streetwear or clothing brand had emerged, and that was just from going down to Deep Rock in the morning. And he had been thinking something similar but along different lines, and so we got into this conversation about these topics. And just like with the other people that I've talked about and will talk about in these videos, we only met, like we didn't exchange numbers or anything like that. I don't think I'm not sure if he used mobile phones, but he was on no benefits whatsoever, and was like living near the creek with like what Australians call a swag, I guess, which is like a makeshift sort of bed thing that you roll up and carry with you when you're not using it, obviously. And but I was so taken by the fact that he wasn't on government benefits, so he was receiving no income whatsoever and was just surviving. But the thing about it was he like radiated this this glow, and it was especially resonant at that time in my life, given what I just experienced. And for him to be doing it without accommodation and without monetary income. So it was, yeah, so there was there was a strong resonance between us, but we only met like in a cluster of, I think, 2 or 3 Fridays. So it was always on the Friday when I came here, because that's kind of the way that it turned out. We didn't agree to meet here, or we didn't schedule anything or anything like that. It was just I returned, and then he happened to turn up again. And so over the course of those 2 or 3 sessions, if you like, he revealed to me that he grew up in an area that I know for pretty much, I guess a few reasons, but one in particular is that there is a professional skateboarder, long-time skater, who I've enjoyed parts from, and whose attitude I've enjoyed in interviews I've watched. And yeah, it was timely because I'd been revisiting stuff that he'd done, like after returning back to Melbourne. But I was watching his stuff in Bangkok as well. And so this guy not only came from that area, but he went to school or grew up, maybe both, with this skater. And that was astounding. But it's also worth noting that he did not know of the restaurant that I'd had the experience in, and he had no knowledge of who owned it, or or he had not even eaten there either. So yeah, but his experiences with the fact that he has this connection with this skater then became especially significant over time, but it would be like 2 or 3 months before the significance became apparent to me. Okay, so as part of that morning ritual that I've talked about in previous chapters, I would get coffee at a place just across the road there, and that is the place where the attendant told me the story about the ghost experience with the clothing bin. And it's where I also met who still works there, an attendant who, like the guy I met with at the park and the guy on Brunswick Street I talked to about witchcraft, he also shared common ground with me in terms of stuff that I asked about. And he will feature in later episodes because stuff that he said to me influenced, like the date of the launch, etc. And he would talk to me about like paranormal stuff, conspiracy theories, ghost experiences. He's from Sri Lanka, and so he would talk to me about matters pertinent to like South Asia. And so we had quite intense discussions, and meeting him at that time was very timely, like everything else. But he started to speak to me about this woman named Shannon, and she had appeared in his life, like while he was working there. She was a customer, like for an extended period of time, and started talking to him about numerology, brought him some crystals and gave them to him. I'm pretty sure she was selling them at the time, and would engage in discussions around the stuff that we were talking about, and he would pass on stuff that he learned from her. And so this name Shannon consistently came up in our conversations. And then around the corner there is a music venue, and suddenly these posters started popping up at the same time for this band with the name Shannon in it. It was Shannon and the Clams, I think. And so I would be crossing the road and seeing these band posters at around the exact same time when I started to learn about this person, that former customer of the guy working there. And so this name was kind of appearing continually. And then the other relevance of that name is that it is first name of one of the owners of the restaurant where I had the transformative experience. And so I guess there was just this accumulation process. And it's also the owner of that restaurant who is identical to the woman who appeared in my dream from mid-2017. The other woman is someone I will discuss later, because I then realised over time that it was not who I originally thought it was. But I awoke on Christmas morning, I remember it very clearly, and I was just like standing like stunned for some reason in the living room, and just consumed by this thought, because around that time in November, I'm pretty sure, early December, an extended interview video of that skater that I discussed with the guy in the park around the corner from the restaurant was published. And I also saw this funny little, there's a container of dill at that restaurant, and they had written on the container, "You're such a dill." And that really so all this stuff accumulated, and it accumulated subconsciously, and I was standing in the room, and then I realized, oh my God, the Shannon who owns that restaurant, who is identical to the woman who appeared in my dream, was married to the skater who I talked about with the guy at the park around the corner from the restaurant, who grew up with the skater in an area of Australia. And the reason why dill comes into it is that I first saw the Shannon who owns the restaurant in the video when she was with the skater in the first episode of this skate video series on the internet, like around a decade ago. And but I hadn't made that connection, and it had been, so this is December 25, so between September 14 and December 25 I hadn't made that connection. But because of the accumulation of events, the Shannons appearing, the conversation with that guy, the publishing of that interview, then seeing that little joke about dill, because a skater with the surname Dill is in that episode where I first saw the skater and his then partner, Shannon. And it suddenly dawned on me, all these pieces coming together like a puzzle, that yes, there was an even deeper resonance with the person who now is, I'm pretty certain, the sole owner of that restaurant, and who is identical to the woman who appeared in my dream. So it's just an example. So I just want you to imagine, things were overwhelming at the time, or overpowering, intense, and then things like that just ramp things up even further.